Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. A cool wind swept through Central Park on this late October afternoon, stirring the russet and gold leaves falling from the maple trees like fragments of memory. The air carried that unmistakable scent of damp wood and earth, heralding the approach of winter. The sky was tinged with a pale gray, and the sun, low on the horizon, cast a golden light that danced across the surface of the large pond. Passers-by were becoming rarer at this hour. A few bundled-up joggers passed silently, their muffled footsteps muffled by the leaves. A mother slowly pushed a stroller, lost in thought. The children's laughter had dissipated with the heat of the day, and the park now seemed suspended in a melancholic tranquility. Sitting on a wrought iron bench near the water's edge, Alexander White seemed carved from stone. His black coat was perfectly tailored, his tie neatly knotted, yet an imperceptible weariness weighed on his shoulders. At his feet, a half-empty coffee cup trembled in the wind. Beside him, his 8-year-old daughter, Emily, was curled up in her wheelchair, her hands clasped in her lap, her gaze lost in the trembling reflections of the water. For 3 years, since that fateful day, she had barely spoken. She observed the world without truly belonging to it, as if a part of her had remained stuck in that suspended moment, just before impact. The accident had been brutal. A speeding sedan driven by a drunken man had mown down the family car as it was leaving a theater. Alexander had escaped without a scratch, as if protected by some ironic fate. His wife, Claire, had been killed instantly, her body shattered by the force of the impact. Emily had survived, but her spinal cord had been severed, and she had never moved her legs again. Alexander, this man whom nothing seemed able to shake in the icy world of finance, had collapsed internally. He had sold his shares in several of his companies to finance treatments. He had met with the greatest specialists in Boston, Zurich, Tokyo, even Seoul. Each diagnosis was a hammer blow. Always the same word, irreversible. And now he was here. Every Saturday, he took Emily to Central Park. Not to distract her. She wasn't really responding anymore. But to give meaning to their routine, to hold on to something alive. Sometimes he told her stories. Other times, he remained silent, like today. As the sky slowly darkened and the first streetlights came on in the park, a figure appeared at the end of the path. A man was moving slowly, dragging an old metal cart behind him that creaked with every step. He wore a long, threadbare jacket, once perhaps black, now stained and threadbare. His grizzled beard partially obscured a face marked by life, but his eyes were a piercing, almost translucent blue. A blue Alexander had never seen, neither in business nor in his nightmares. The cart contained empty bottles, crumpled newspapers, and a rolled-up sleeping bag. The man stopped in front of them, a few steps from the bench. He looked at them without fear or hostility. Then he spoke, in a deep, calm, strangely soothing voice. "Sir," he said calmly, "I can restore your daughter's ability to walk." Time seemed to stand still. The wind stopped. The sounds of the park disappeared. Alexander felt his heart skip a beat. He slowly turned his head towards the man. "What did you say?" he breathed, his throat tight. The stranger took a step forward. Emily looked up at him for the first time in days. "I can cure her," he repeated. "If you agree." Alexander leaped to his feet, his features tense between anger, incomprehension, and a dangerous hope he no longer dared to allow himself to feel. His eyes, dark and sharp, stared at the man as if he wanted to wring the truth from him with the sheer force of his gaze. "Are you kidding me?" he roared, his voice breaking the silence of the park. "Do you know who I am?" His tone wasn't a question, but a threat. This man, this stranger dressed like a wandering ghost, dared to rekindle a flame that Alexander had worked tirelessly to extinguish. 3 years of suffering, disillusionment, grief, and medical certainties that he had learned to accept, or at least were like armor. The man didn't flinch. His blue gaze, as tranquil as a lake at dusk, remained fixed on Alexander's. "Yes," he replied simply. "I know who you are. But that's not important. What is important is what you're willing to do for her." A silence fell. Alexander, taken aback by the answer, didn't know whether to call security, run away, or listen. His fists were shaking, but it wasn't from rage. It was fear. Fear that this man would tell the truth. that everything would change. Or worse, that he would lie and break Emily once again. Beside him, Emily, usually so motionless, had turned her head. Her hazel eyes had settled on the old man with curiosity mixed with caution. She blinked several times, as if trying to see beyond what he appeared. The beggar slowly knelt down to his level, placing one knee on the wet gravel. The distant crackling of leaves in the trees seemed to fall silent, giving way to this suspended moment. "Your name is Emily, isn't it?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper, like a prayer. She nodded shyly, her fingers clenched around the arm of her chair. A glimmer of light crossed her eyes, an echo of childhood, of the one she had lost too soon. "Do you believe in miracles, Emily?" She shrugged, not looking at him. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Finally, she answered, "I don't know anymore." Her words fell like a sigh too heavy for her small body. Alexander felt her heart clench. It was the first time she had spoken to a stranger since the accident. The man took a deep breath, as if absorbing the pain he had just heard. "My name is Elijah," he said. "What I'm offering you is not a magic trick. It's not a lie. It's not a miracle. It's a gift, but it comes at a price." Alexander, still standing, crossed his arms. His instincts were taking over. He had made deals in the highest echelons of the world. He knew the power games, the con artists, the manipulators. "How much?" he asked in a dry, almost cynical tone. Elijah slowly shook his head. "It's not about money. Money can't buy everything, Mr. White. Especially not what I'm offering you. The price is greater than that." Alexander narrowed his eyes. "So what? A debt? A favor? A strange commitment? What do you expect from me?" Elijah stood up slowly, his knees cracking. Then he answered, bluntly, "Your truth. Your pride. Your way of seeing the world. You will have to give up what you think you know. Because this gift, it only heals those who are willing to believe, truly. It requires surrender, trust, and faith." A nervous, almost bitter laugh escaped Alexander. He ran a hand over his forehead. "You're crazy," he hissed. "Completely crazy. But, if you're telling the truth, then prove it." Elijah stepped toward Emily, his gaze soft and respectful. He crouched down again, then slowly reached out to her motionless knees. "May I?" he asked. Emily looked at him hesitantly. Then she nodded imperceptibly. Elijah placed his hand with infinite delicacy on her legs. At that moment, time seemed to slow down. The wind stopped. Even the branches stopped rustling. "You'll feel warmth first, then tingling," he explained. "Tell me how it feels, okay?" Emily closed her eyes. Alexander was no longer breathing. The seconds stretched. Then suddenly, a breath. Emily opened her eyes wide, shining as if they reflected the light of the entire sky. "Dad," she whispered. "What?" said Alexander, leaning forward. "I can feel my legs." The next morning, the October sun streamed in golden sheets through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the White Mansion, nestled on Park Avenue. The walls, usually so silent and icy, vibrated with a strange tension. In the grand drawing room adorned with marble, impressionist paintings, and Persian rugs, something unimaginable was happening. Emily is on the rise. Without help, without being lifted. She placed one bare foot on the waxed floor, then the other, hesitantly, as if rediscovering gravity. Her legs trembled slightly, like two frail branches under the weight of a miracle. But she remained standing. And then she took a step, another, and another one. In a corner of the room, Alexander stood, but swaying, filming the scene with a trembling hand. His phone vibrated between his fingers like a trapped bird. His tears flowed freely. Not discreet, dignified tears. No, the great, open sobs of a broken man rediscovering a part of his soul. Around him, the domestic staff, accustomed to order, perfection, and coldness, were in a state of shock. The housekeeper covered her mouth, her eyes watering. One of the butlers dropped the cup he was holding. No one understood. But everyone saw. Emily was walking. Doctors were urgently called. 2 renowned neurologists, one from Columbia, the other flown in by helicopter from Boston. They performed MRIs, motor tests, and extensive sensory examinations. All the records confirmed what was already known, a complete, irreversible spinal cord injury. And yet, Emily moved, even ran, before the astonished eyes of science. "It's impossible," one of them muttered, rereading the scans. Either the initial diagnoses were wrong, which is highly unlikely, or we're dealing with something we can't explain. Emily, on the other hand, wasn't flustered. She simply smiled, her brown hair flowing as she twirled around the living room. Elijah told me I could do it, she said, stopping in front of Alexander. He believed in me, Dad, and I believed in him. At that moment, something inside Alexander broke. No pain this time, but a silent crack in the rigid walls of his ego, his certainties, his relationship with the world. The next day, he issued a worldwide alert. He circulated Emily's video on social media, in the media, and in medical and spiritual circles. He offered a $10 million reward to anyone who found Elijah alive. It was an unprecedented campaign. Drones, private investigators, and detectives specializing in missing persons. Hospitals, shelters, and police stations were searched. No results. Even the homeless people in Central Park, when questioned one by one, shook their heads. An old man with blue eyes and a shopping cart? No, never seen one. Elijah? That name is biblical, isn't it? Not a trace, not a word, as if he had never existed. And yet, Emily walked, ran, even danced. But as the weeks passed, a strange unease settled over Alexander. He was happy, yes, but behind the joy, a question gnawed at him. Who was Elijah? A man, a prophet, an angel, a madman, a traveler between worlds, a punishment or a gift? And why had he, Alexander White, a man of power, calculation, arrogance, been chosen to experience such a miracle? Doubts gnawed at him. He looked in the mirror, unable to recognize himself. The same suit, the same Swiss watch, the same face, but the man behind it was no longer the same. So he decided to change. He resigned from the White Group board of directors, watched by his incredulous associates. He sold his yachts, his jets, half of his properties in the Hamptons, St. Bart's, and Dubai. He founded the Elijah Institute, an organization dedicated to rehabilitating injured children and supporting the homeless. He opened centers in 10 states, created scholarships, funded independent research into unexplained phenomena. He began traveling the United States, sometimes sleeping in homeless shelters, talking with anonymous people, listening to their stories, their pain. But at every stage, it was the same pattern: contradictory testimonies, illusions, unclear leads. "He looks like a guy I saw in Detroit," said an old woman at a Michigan shelter. "I think he was preaching in an abandoned church in New Mexico," said a former military man in Texas. Alexander followed every lead. Sometimes he thought he saw a silhouette, a blue gaze, but he could never reach it. Like a shadow, always one step ahead. And every night, in the most basic hotel room, he watched the first video on his phone of Emily walking into the living room and wondered, "What else do I need to understand, Elijah? And where are you?" 5 years passed. Emily had grown up. Her hair, once held back by childish barrettes, now flowed freely, framing a determined face imbued with quiet strength. At 16, she was already more than a survivor. She was a voice, a rising figure in the advocacy for accessible and humane medical care. In schools, hospitals, on social media, and even at the UN, she told her story, that of a man who came from nowhere, of a miracle without explanation, of a love that transcended logic. Some admired her fervently, convinced they were dealing with a young saint. Others, more cynical, questioned everything. She was never paralyzed, they said. It's all a media stunt. But Emily never responded to these accusations. She smiled peacefully. "What I have become doesn't need convincing. I walk, and I walk for others." One icy January evening on the windswept streets of Chicago, Alexander White walked into a modest but clean homeless shelter funded by his foundation. He regularly came incognito, wearing a heavy wool coat, without escort or announcement. But that evening, something passed through him as he entered. A gentle unease, like a forgotten memory slipping into his veins. He walked slowly between the tables. Men and women were eating hot soup, some dozing, others staring into space. And in a dark corner, where the light barely flickered on a crumbling wall, he saw it. Sitting alone at a table, a steaming cup in his hands, the same threadbare coat, the same piercing gaze, eternally calm, Elijah. The world faded around Alexander. No more noise, no more footsteps, no more cold. He approached slowly, as if Elijah might disappear at any moment. His legs felt heavy, as if he were climbing an invisible mountain. "It was you," he whispered, his voice filled with everything he had been trying to understand for the past 5 years. Elijah looked up and nodded slowly. "You kept your promise. You gave up what you thought you knew." Alexander felt his knees weaken. He sat down opposite him, unable to hold back his tears. "Who are you?" he finally asked, his voice choked. Elijah tilted his head slightly. His gaze wasn't mocking or distant, just deep, real. A simple messenger. Sent by who? God. Fate. Elijah smiled, but it wasn't a smile of mystery. It was the smile of a man who speaks the truth, even if it's hard to hear. By the one you loved, and whom you let go, without ever saying goodbye. Alexander's heart sank so hard he thought he might collapse. A sudden shudder ran up his spine. He whispered, as if in confession, "Sarah, my wife." Elijah nodded slowly. "Her love is what saved you. What you believed to be a miracle didn't come from me. It wasn't magic. It was an act of faith. It was her last breath, her last prayer for both of you. Pure love can move the soul. It can heal the body. It can even bring light back to those who have lost everything." Alexander could no longer speak. He wept silently, his face in his hands. An old pain was being released, a sorrow repressed since Sarah's death, that day when he had remained cold, absent, refusing to cry so as not to appear weak. And that was the true price of the miracle, facing the truth. When he looked up, Elijah was standing up. He picked up his rusty old cart, nodded one last time, then walked towards the door. Outside, the snow fell silently. Elijah sank into it without looking back. Alexander, still trembling, went out in turn. He followed with his eyes the silhouette disappearing into the white night. And he saw something he never forgot. The footsteps in the snow faded as they appeared, as if the earth refused to keep a trace of him. Even today, Emily White travels the world, carrying a message stronger than any miracle: faith, love, and the power of believing in the invisible. She walks through slums, war hospitals, and prestigious conferences, always with that light in her eyes. His father, Alexander, now lives in a modest house in the Colorado mountains. Gardens, he reads, he meditates. No more empires to manage. No more walls to defend. Sometimes when asked what he saw that night in Chicago, he replies, "What I received was greater than a miracle. It was a lesson, a chance to become human again." And above her fireplace, in a simple frame of raw wood, sits a photo. Emily, walking barefoot in Central Park, arms outstretched, laughing in the wind. In the background, blurred but distinct, we can make out a silhouette. A bearded man, a threadbare coat, and that distant gaze, fixed on a horizon that only he seemed to understand.